We came to Robben Island wondering how people like Nelson Mandela could survive a place designed to break them and still choose healing over hatred. That question followed us across Cape Town, from the prison to a South African meal made for sharing and into a beautiful garden tied to the island's much older history of division. I'm Judy.
And I'm Kevin. Welcome back to Finding Gina Marie, where we share our lives as full-time travelers and the connections we make along the way. Our story begins at the V&A Waterfront, named for Queen Victoria and her son Alfred, not her husband Albert.
Prince Alfred helped begin construction of Cape Town's modern harbor in 1860. Today, this is where ferries leave for Robben Island. It's also one of the busiest places for restaurants, museums, shops, and entertainment.
Cape Town sits on Table Bay, where the city meets the Atlantic Ocean, and Table Mountain rises up behind it. Robben Island lies about 11 kilometers offshore.
Crossing to Robben Island only takes about 30 to 40 minutes. It's known around the world as the place where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years in prison.
But the history of separating people here began centuries before apartheid, and Mandela was only one of the many prisoners whose stories matter.
As soon as the ferry docked, we went directly to one of the waiting buses. I didn't expect that the guide on the bus that was going to be showing us around was a former political prisoner. In fact, he mentioned that he's even living on the island several days a week in order to be able to give talks like this.
I can't believe how much courage it takes to come back and live in a place where you were held prisoner for so many years.
We weren't allowed to take video on the bus, but we understood why. He was opening up his heart to us. He was mentioning that he'd been detained for 8 months without trial, and then he was in prison for 5 years. And he told us that some of the people who tortured him were racists, but he did not want to become like them.
His point was that he refused to teach himself to hate, and he refused to teach hatred to his son. He didn't want to become like the people that were incarcerating him and torturing him.
In fact, he said, people may be conditioned to hate one another because of race, but the only race that truly matters is the human race. So although our primary reason was to see where Nelson Mandela had spent so much time in prison, we learned that there were so many other stories that were important to hear about here as well. And one of the most disturbing stories belongs to Robert Sobukwe, founder of the Pan-Africanist Congress.
Black South Africans were forced to carry a passbook known as the Dawn Pass. It controlled where they could live, work, and travel.
Our guide shared the humiliation he had of watching police enter his family's home and arrest his father. Under apartheid, officers could stop Black South Africans and demand to see their passbooks at any time, whether they were on the street or even inside their own homes. In 1960, Sobukwe helped lead a national protest against the pass laws. Protesters were encouraged to leave their passes at home and offer themselves for arrest. It was meant to be a very peaceful protest. In Sharpeville, police opened fire, killing 69 people, but that's only according to the official count.
As a protest, Nelson Mandela actually burned his passbook. Sobukwe was sentenced to 3 years, but when his sentence ended, the government changed the law so it could keep holding him. He spent 6 more years here, isolated even from the other political prisoners. He couldn't even speak to them. It wasn't just solitary confinement in the main prison. It was a completely different building.
Part of that was because the government was afraid not only of what he had done, but the influence he might have on other prisoners.
Let's talk about the quarry. Political prisoners were forced to perform hard labor in this limestone quarry. This wasn't productive work. They were told to move the limestone from one end of the quarry to the other. And thinking that they've done a job that they can continue to do the next day, they were told, no, now today you're going to move it back to the place it started from. It was meant to break them. It was meant to make them feel like they were doing useless work.
But the prisoners transformed this place of punishment into a place of learning. They taught one another about politics, law, history, and the world beyond the island. Their principle was simple. Each one, teach one. Even though some of the people who arrived were uneducated, some were teachers, doctors, lawyers, and of course, political organizers. And all of that collective knowledge became another form of resistance.
There was a cave there, and they used to store all the little materials that they had scraped together for their training. They would tear pieces of cement bags, fold them up, and hide them in the cave, and any kind of writing materials they could possibly scavenge. Years later, former prisoners returned and each placed a stone in this pile. It became a memorial created by the people who had survived this place.
We got off the bus and we were ready to go inside the maximum security prison. And here we were met with another former prisoner. He was only 18 when he was sent to Robben Island in 1986. He had been arrested for political activity during apartheid's final, increasingly violent decade. Most 18-year-olds are only beginning to imagine what their adult life might become. He entered this prison and was stripped even of the ordinary dignity of being known by his name. He and every other prisoner was identified only by a number.
We walked into Section F. This building contained communal cells. As we walked in this room, we saw beds along the back, and our guide told us immediately that that's not what they had. Those came later in an act by the Red Cross. What they actually slept on were these mats, and they were barely a mat.
In fact, they mentioned that there were water systems underneath the floors, which meant that those floors were really cold.
And the black prisoners didn't have a lot of clothing. They were denied long trousers, proper shoes, jackets, even underwear.
And that's because the treatment they received depended on how the government classified the color of their skin.
And everything was meant to break them. Everything the government did was to tear them down.
It wasn't just clothes that separated people. We could see a blow-up version of what the diet actually was. People in prison were categorized into two groups. One for colored and Asians, and then what were called Bantu, which meant native blacks. Colored and Asian prisoners received one ration scale, while blacks received less. There was no bread in the blacks' diet, less sugar, coffee, and fat than colored and Asians received. And the blacks' diet also had less variety. Of course, neither group received nearly enough rations for the amount of hard labor they were having to do each day.
Prisoners fought the unequal ration system, sometimes using hunger strikes to demand better treatment. It was so heartbreaking. Contact with family was tightly restricted. Prisoners could send and receive very few letters, and all the passages that were sensitive or things that the government didn't want the prisoners to read were blacked out and stamped so they couldn't see them. They did figure out that they could hold the letters up to light and see through the back. So the prison system took it to the next level and started cutting out those portions of the letters.
Now, some of the things that were redacted might just have been a death in the family or what was happening in people's lives, not necessarily anything politically sensitive, but the government just wanted to withhold things. And I think that not knowing was really difficult. Plus, the rules could change at any time, which always kept the prisoners off balance.
Our guide said that the physical labor was demanding, but the mental abuse really broke them down.
After Section F, we moved on to Section B, which was a series of solitary cells. And that's where Nelson Mandela spent 18 years.
Each cell was identical. Mandela's was highlighted with this red bucket, but overall they were all the same, 8 by 7 foot.
Our tour was an entire bus full of people, so we really didn't have the luxury of standing and just appreciating the size of the cells before we were ushered through each of them. It really would have been a little bit more powerful to just have a moment in front of any of them.
Our tour guide in the prison really left an impact on me. He called us therapists. He gets to tell his story again and again, and each time it's a little bit easier, and he feels this weight lifted off of him. We are helping him, and he wanted us to take away from the prison that there is a need for everybody to work together, to be one race, and to stop the apartheid, stop the separation, stop the pain, stop the war. He really wanted the world to be a better place.
And that was the takeaway he asked us to share with others. It was a deliberate choice that these people made after detention, humiliation, violence, and years of lost freedom to let go of the division that the government was trying to create.
And the fact that they came back here to give us tours, to give us information, firsthand information, is remarkable.
One of the things that we were also told was that it was so important for these prisoners to share their firsthand experiences so that they couldn't be manipulated and they could control the narrative of the story of the things that occurred here.
I feel privileged that we got to be an audience to that.
It's one thing when you read about it in books or you hear it second or third hand, but to actually be in the room and hearing their first-hand experiences is really
impactful.
Yes.
After this very heavy time on Robben Island, we were greeted at the waterfront by these SEALs, who took a very casual look at life and decided that their best life is lived laying on this platform, sunning themselves, and just relaxing with the group.
And that was perfectly fitting. Robben Island takes its name from the Dutch word for seals, so its name essentially means Seal Island. We stopped at Jollof Café, which is right in the V&A Waterfront, and at the suggestion of our host, we ordered shisha nyama, a South African meal of meat grilled over flames served with pap and chakalaka. And this is called chakalaka. And it's supposed to be a spicy relish. It's really good. It's warm. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be cold. And it's got beans and a ton of spices and flavors in here. It's loaded. And it's a little spicy, but man, it's really good.
Well, the polenta's not spicy, so a mix of the two is probably perfect.
Yes, yeah. In fact, you can just order this and this as a combination side dish.
The name roughly means burn the meat in Zulu, but it's also about gathering, socializing, and eating together.
Our meal arrived as one large platter for us to share. It was just such a refreshing contrast about how food on Robben Island was used to separate prisoners according to race, whereas here the whole idea was to gather around the same food and eat together. We loved visiting Table Mountain and Cape Peninsula, which was in last week's video if you missed it, so we wanted to spend more time in the beauty of nature. Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden is one of Cape Town's most beautiful places. But even here, the history of division still exists. When Nelson Mandela visited Kirstenbosch in 1996, he planted a pepperbark tree. Unfortunately, in 2020, it blew down after a bad storm, so it was replaced, and this pepperbark tree stands next to it. You'll want to set aside some time to visit Kirstenbosch. You could spend easily 3 hours here. It focuses mainly on plants indigenous to southern Africa, and especially after the stone, steel, and exposed landscape of Robben Island, the garden feels open, green, and alive.
I wasn't prepared for this botanical garden. I didn't know what to expect. I knew there was a lot of history and nature here, but I didn't know that there was going to be so much variety. There are so many places you can walk. Sometimes you have one path through a place. This has dozens. As you're walking through these trails, there's a lot of little offshoots. Go down to different areas. This well is feeding this trough, a little tiny waterfall. They've got the water running through all the stones so you can walk it. This area feels very ancient, the way they've set it up. When you're in this section of the garden, you're going to see metal dinosaurs all over the place. That's because these plants are prehistoric.
There's a lovely little walking path that takes you through them all. Really enjoyable.
Yeah, count the dinosaurs. I've seen at least 5 or 6.
Oh, at least, yes. The cycads were especially striking. It's probably one of my favorite parts of the entire gardens. They resemble palms, but their ancestors date back to the age of the dinosaurs. The centenary tree canopy walkway is better known as the boomslang because it snakes through the trees.
And not only does it snake, it also wiggles.
A lot. One of the things that I really enjoy about Kirstenbosch is just how peaceful it is. You hear birds singing and you have incredible scenery. It's not too hot. There's shady areas. There's places to sit. I feel like overall, it just is a beautiful sensory experience, and being in nature is always a pleasure.
Except when the 40 students come walking by on the swinging bridge.
The 40 children don't make it easier.
There's so much history here. I don't know. I think it's just really incredible.
You know, South Africa's given us a lot of nature so far. We're just loving every moment of it.
When we were looking at a map to decide where to go, we came across the name Van Riebeek's Hedge. We remembered that name from our time at Robben Island. Jan van Riebeek headed the administration that banished Achumatu and 2 of his companions as the first political prisoners to the island. Achumatu was a leader of the Khoikhoi indigenous people who fought against the Dutch in the 1600s because they were creating boundaries that stopped the Khoikhoi's animals from grazing and moving through the lands they had always used. Now we understood better the statue we saw just outside the prison gates on the island.
So this is the best section that truly looks like a hedge. The rest of it's much wilder. The hedge reflected an older colonial idea that those in power could control the land, restrict movement, decide who belonged on which side of the boundary, not unlike what had been happening during apartheid.
Below us is a metal pterodactyl, which is pretty cool, but this whole little valley is stunning.
When I heard we were going to a garden, I figured it was just going to be mostly flat. I wasn't expecting to get majestic views and even a shot of the whole city. Like, we have really great views here, almost as good as when we were on the mountaintop in some way.
And I also think that here we are in winter. I wasn't really sure what we would see, if it would be worthwhile. Totally worth it. Some areas offer less mobility than others. We're on a path that right now is sloping down, but it's a different thing when you're going up it, and that could make it hard.
And there's a lot of stairs in some areas, so you miss out on parts of the park.
But overall, it's beautiful, and it actually is designed for wheelchairs, and if you just can take it slow and you're walking with a cane, you can totally get through this.
We've enjoyed a ton of activities in Cape Town. That's why we designed and built Voyage Vault, so we could track all our expenses for food, tickets, and transportation effortlessly. You can download Voyage Vault from the Apple App Store, use it for free for 2 weeks, and get 10% off by scanning this QR code or using the link in our description.
So let's talk about what we spent here. The Robben Island tour and entry fee was $129 plus tips. The entry fee to Kirstenbosch Garden was $33 for both of us, and Jollof Café was $18. We used Bolt to get around, and getting to and from the garden was less than $10, including tips each way.
Want to see more of Table Mountain? We have a video with that and Cape Town Peninsula you won't want to miss. We've got penguins too. Check it out here. Thank you so much for coming along with us. We have a few more episodes coming to you from Cape Town, so you'll want to subscribe if you haven't already.
Remember to
wander more,
worry less,
and bring a passport.
Until next time.
Until next time.